I'm your bedtime historian, and it's a little strange that some of the sleepiest villages in England owed their quiet nights to the world's most chaotic family feud. Roses, those prim, polite garden flowers, were the official symbols of a war where uncles poisoned nephews and cousins decided battle plans over cold meat pies. On parchment maps, it all began with a question of who deserved a shiny crown. But in muddy reality, it meant fields, trampled flat barns, set ablaze, and alleyways where nobody quite trusted the person sharing their bread. The sky gray as a boiled potato, pressed low over manor and hovel alike. Horses nickered in the mist, cartwheels splashed in rainwater, and gossip scuttled faster than rats between straw mattresses. You can almost smell the candle wax and spilled ale, see the flicker of nervous glances in every smoke-filled hall. How did England, with all its oaths and velvet capes, find itself at war with itself again and again over a crown that never seemed to fit anyone for long? Why would two ancient roses, one red, one white, make so many people risk their heads and hearths? If you find the gentle clamor of centuries-old drama oddly more comforting than modern headlines, maybe this is your moment to tap, like, or subscribe. Let this war keep you company, not the evening news. And if you've ever daydreamed about which historical century would be your least favorite to survive in, you might be in good company here. Some of us make lists. Now, let the lamps dim, the quilt settle over your toes, and follow me to a time when every quiet lane in England could wake to the thunder of armored boots. You slip through the stone arch of a small market town as wordless tension hangs in the fog, wondering who will claim England's crown or simply survive another dawn. You are not a bystander tonight, but a traveler in tangled loyalties and unlucky omens. Listen. The first claims were not shouted in grand halls, but whispered in corners where old men poked at genealogies and women clutched babies with nervous fingers. A child's laughter echoing off timbered walls might turn to a mother's warning. Even the inns, the only warmth for miles, grew chill when rival names were uttered. York or Lancaster pick wrong, and your bread could turn to ash. There's a sly humor in how English wars always start politely. A letter is penned in crisp script accusing this duke or that countess of one too many ambitions. Yet in truth, the opening volleys are always as much about wounded pride as about power. The roses pressed in old books looked innocent, the men who wore them anything but. A gust rattles your shutters, and you wonder if you lived. Then would you have seen the storm coming? Or would you be busy mending a fence, gossiping at market, missing the signs entirely, until the first conscripted boy stumbled home with blood on his sleeve? Historians still argue whether the Wars of the Roses really began with a single insult or with a long chain of grudges nobody could remember the start of. One chilly fact: almost every great house in England, Percy Neville, Stafford Beaufort, swapped sides at least once, if only to avoid losing everything. A quirky truth: some villages changed allegiances as easily as changing churchwardens, painting their front doors red or white, depending on which army was rumored to be nearest. Yet no scholarly consensus exists about when ordinary people stopped caring who wore the crown and started worrying only about keeping their sheep safe. Did the red rose or the white truly matter to those digging turnips, or just to those weighing gold? You keep moving boots, soft on muddy cobbles, as dawn threatens the horizon. Somewhere, a watchman yawns. The game of roses is about to bloom into chaos, and you, lucky dreamer, have a front row seat to the unlikeliest war ever fought for a throne. Some nights, you dream in branches, and names a tangled net where every face looks familiar, yet no one can be trusted for long. English history loves its family trees, but none are as twisty or headache-inducing as the ones that fueled the Wars of the Roses. Here everyone seems to be someone's cousin, half-brother, or in-law twice removed. And in a world where birth order meant everything, every cradle rocked with the secret hope or dread of becoming the next rightful heir. Imagine a grand hall lined with dusty portraits, sharp-nosed dukes glaring at soft-chinned barons, countesses pinning their hopes on boys with weak chins and even weaker claims. This is not a fairy tale tapestry. It's a genealogy chart in chaos. The roots run deep, but the branches are broken, twisted, and sometimes outright faked. Why? Because power in this world is a matter of bloodlines, and the right or wrong parentage can make the difference between a silk-lined bed and a cold cell in the tower. The air in these noble houses carries the scent of parchment and hot candle wax mixed with the sharper tang of secrets. You picture yourself wandering the corridors, overhearing whispers about marriages of convenience, secret love affairs, and more than one birth date quietly adjusted in the records. Some nights, you'd think the true pastime of the English aristocracy wasn't hunting or poetry, but genealogical sabotage. Here's your one mainstream fact for the pillow. Tonight, the claims to the throne of both York and Lancaster trace back to sons of Edward III. This means that technically, every branch on the royal tree felt entitled to a bit of the crown. But as you meander through history, you realize that not all branches grow in sunlight. Some flourish in shadow, others in manure. A single wrong turn, a bad alliance, or a poorly timed illness could prune you from the tree forever. A quirky detail. The chroniclers of the day often drew family trees as actual rose bushes' roots, tangled thorns prominent, and no two roses blooming quite the same. Even those who copied the trees sometimes accidentally smudged a line or forgot a marriage, especially when the political wind shifted. There's an entire side hustle for monks with steady hands and flexible ethics. Some scholars remain puzzled by the sheer stubbornness of these families. Why cling to a lost claim or resurrect a forgotten cousin just for another shot at the throne? Is it pride, desperation, or the deeply English love of an underdog story? There is no clear answer, only more questions, like why so many heirs ended up conveniently misplaced in the tower, or how uncles so often became regents after a suspicious hunting accident. You, drifting between sleep and history, realize that in this world, kinship is a double-edged sword. You might be safe in the family one day, then exiled as a traitor the next, all because someone's memory or ambition outlasted your own. Earlier, you passed through foggy towns. Now you stand in front of a sprawling family tree, every name shimmering with possibility and peril. If you're feeling a little lost in the tangle, that's exactly how many felt then. The only certainty, a cousin today might be an enemy by next harvest, and your safest bet is to keep your own name off the chart. It's easy to picture the Wars of the Roses as grand scenes in castles, but the real thunder began on a muddy field in the market town of St. Albans, a place where ale was stronger than the walls and nobody expected history to arrive on horseback. You find yourself standing in the drizzle watching as boots churn up the turf and the shouts of men echo between the timbered houses. This is not an arena built for glory. It's a patchwork of shops, gardens, and anxious glances from behind linen curtains. For years, tensions simmered among the nobility, but on this cold May morning in 1455, there's no more room for whispers. The banners of York and Lancaster flap in the wet breeze, their colors bright against gray skies. Neighbors who shared bread now eye each other from opposite sides of the square. You watch as armored men argue over who should lead, who should stand back, and who is responsible for starting all this in the first place. Nobody seems certain, least of all the nervous footman at the rear, clutching pikes with white-knuckled fists. A mainstream historical fact for your night. The First Battle of St. Albans lasted less than an hour, but changed everything. In the confusion of narrow streets and sharp garden walls, the Duke of Somerset fell, ending one feud, igniting a dozen more. This brief, chaotic skirmish set the bloody precedent. Wars in England would now be fought in marketplaces, not just on distant fields. You might not expect it, but a quirky detail sticks out. Some townsfolk sold snacks and ale to both sides, hoping whoever won would forget which flag they'd waved. A few even tried to charge a toll for soldiers trampling their cabbages, a practical business if you ignore the crossbow bolts whistling overhead. The battle's aftermath included more complaints about ruined gardens than about lost banners. Surviving records offer conflicting accounts of who gave the first order to attack. Was it a panicked knight, a calculating duke, or just the impatient hiss of fear? Historians still bicker over whether the Yorkists meant to fight or if a misunderstanding over a closed gate led to bloodshed. Some believe the weather damp and chilly made everyone quicker to anger, or maybe just desperate to get it over with and back to supper. You slip between barrels and broken fences, feeling the strange energy that pulses through a town caught off guard. The air is thick with anticipation, fear, and the sour tang of spilled ale. One old woman curses the mud for ruining her best shoes. A boy chases a chicken through the legs of a wounded lord. No epic music, no banners waving in slow motion, just the stubborn reality of English Civil War, messy fast and almost absurd in its domesticity. As the battle quiets and smoke curls above the rooftops, you sense that something irreversible has begun. The survivors don't cheer. They count neighbors' close shutters and wonder which name to utter in their prayers tonight. The wars, you realize, will not be noble duels between righteous heroes, but a rolling series of accidents, ambitions, and very bad days for cabbages. As the last echoes fade, you move on one step deeper into England's most bewildering feud. The sharp scent of rain still hangs in the air as you find yourself wandering the shadowed corridors of a palace where the true thunder of the Wars of the Roses rumbled behind closed doors. Here, candlelight flickers against velvet tapestries, and somewhere above, a woman's voice rises in argument, a voice that will shape the fate of kings and kingdoms. Queen Margaret of Anjou is not content to be a silent figurehead. She is a force of nature in silk and steel, outmaneuvering rivals with the same quiet ferocity as a cat in a nest of sleeping dogs. Imagine being in her presence. Margaret, eyes, narrowed lips, pursed as she studies a map littered with tokens, each representing a noble family she must sway or shatter. She is French by birth, but English by necessity, and the rumors about her sharp tongue and sharper mind float through every echoing hallway. Tonight you are more fly on the wall than confidant, and it is not entirely safe to be either. The history books often sideline Margaret as a supporting player, but your reality now offers a mainstream fact. Margaret led armies, plotted alliances, and outlasted many of her male counterparts. When her husband, the gentle but troubled Henry VI, retreated into his own mind, it was Margaret who strapped on political armor. She wrote commands, raised troops, and if chroniclers are to be believed, once stared down a mutinous baron until he lowered his eyes and his sword. Some even whisper she could bend a lord to her will with a single look, although historians are still arguing whether that's legend or just the terrified recollections of men unused to powerful women. A quirky detail floats by. As you recall a courtier's private letter, Margaret is said to have played chess with real living mice, using them as pawns to amuse and unsettle her enemies during tense negotiations. Others claim she once challenged a rival noble to a duel over a slighted dinner invitation. True or not, these stories stick growing, with each retelling painting her as both strategist and specter. Some scholars debate whether Margaret's iron will was necessity or nature. Was she born to rule, or did the violence and betrayal around her force her to become more ruthless than her enemies? The records don't agree. For every account of her cruelty, there's another of her resilience. She outlasted sieges, betrayals, and even public humiliation, refusing to vanish quietly into history. In the candlelit hush, you sense Margaret's presence in every corner of English politics. She commands respect, but also fear, weaving webs of loyalty and suspicion that will tangle every player in the game. The court, restless and uneasy, looks to her for direction, comfort, or sometimes just survival tips. The Queen's gambit, it seems, is never just a move, but a message. Underestimate her, and you will regret it. As you slip away from the royal chambers, you realize how much of the war is fought not on muddy fields, but in the quieter wars of wit, rumor, and resolve. Margaret's shadow stretches long, and if you hope to survive in this world, you do well to remember her lessons: never show all your cards and never mistake silence for surrender. Past the echoing halls and clashing crests, you return to the muddy crossroads and leaning cottages of England's countryside, where the real struggle to survive is less about crowns and more about getting through another week. Here, in the thick of war, peasants, shopkeepers, and craftspeople become masters of improvisation, everyday heroes, hiding their caution behind polite smiles and the clever folding of a market apron. Picture yourself in a low-ceilinged alehouse, the rushes underfoot musty with spilled cider. A blacksmith wipes soot from his brow, eyeing newcomers with guarded suspicion. Over at the hearth, a baker shares a crust with a traveler, each careful not to mention which noble soldiers have been seen near the bridge. Everyone has a tale about the shifting tides, some stories true, others wild rumor. In times like these, even the family cat learns to hide at the sound of unfamiliar boots, a historical fact to set the tone. The Wars of the Roses left no one untouched. From remote sheepfolds to bustling market squares, the battles upended every routine. One month, you paid taxes to a Yorkist official. The next, a Lancaster man in a muddy doublet demanded twice as much, waving papers with unfamiliar seals. For many, neutrality was the only strategy offering shelter to soldiers of both sides, or learning to disappear behind a stack of firewood until the shouting passed. The quirky, often overlooked truth: some towns held secret festivals, where red and white ribbons were braided together, mock celebrations of unity designed to appease whichever lord was currently in favor. Housewives baked pies in the shapes of both roses, sending trays to the garrison, and hoping it bought enough goodwill to keep the chickens safe. Local priests prayed for peace, but also for plausible deniability should the bishop's men come knocking with uncomfortable questions. Scholarly debate lingers over how deeply the commoners cared about the politics above. Some researchers believe most villagers treated allegiance like weather-changeable, inconvenient best ignored if you wanted to stay dry. Others point to parish records and folk songs as proof that people did form strong opinions, even risking their lives for the side that promised a safer tomorrow. The truth is probably lost in the smoky haze of village fires somewhere between cynicism and hope. Wandering the rutted lanes, you sense that survival here means blending in. A wise woman tucks away her best cheese in a straw cradle, while a farmer's son borrows his uncle's boots to avoid conscription by pretending to limp. The baker nods to both York and Lancaster, trading yesterday's bread for whispered news. If you listen closely, you'll hear it in their laughter. And their silences, the art of staying out of trouble, is just as important as knowing which side is marching up the lane. A new dawn creeps over the village rooftops. As bells call the faithful to Mass, everyone puts on their safest face and steps out into the uncertain light, hoping for a day when the only battles left are with weather and weeds, not armies. The fog of uncertainty thickens as you make your way toward London, where its famous tower stands brooding above the city, part fortress, part prison, part royal mystery box. Here stone walls have witnessed every sort of intrigue, but none more chilling than the disappearance of the young princes Richard and Edward, whose fate still haunts even the boldest night watchman. If you pause outside the tower's heavy gates, you might catch a shiver that has nothing to do with the damp river air. Imagine creeping through the labyrinthine passages as a servant candle stub trembling in your grip, trying not to glance at the cold sealed door of the prince's chamber. The story goes that after their father's death, these boys, barely old enough to wield a wooden sword, were sent to the tower for their protection. But in the shifting storm of the Wars of the Roses, protection can mean a dozen different things. You hear guards muttering that sometimes silence is more dangerous than swords. One historical fact cannot be escaped. In 1483, the princes vanished, leaving England's throne open for their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to step in as Richard III. Chroniclers soon whispered of foul play. Commoners invented ghost stories to explain why such bright promise could be snuffed out so easily. Centuries later, their absence is still a riddle. The tower's stones have been scoured for clues, but all that remains are rumors, two skeletons discovered long after the fact, and the uneasy feeling that the truth walked quietly out a side door when no one was looking. A peculiar detail lingers in the candlelit corners. Some say the tower's ravens began to vanish too, as if the very birds knew something was amiss. Over the years, children played at prince and warden, while mothers threatened mischief makers with tales of vanishing heirs and the dangers of talking back. There's even a record of a midnight prank apples, rolling down a stone staircase, echoing like lost footsteps, meant to frighten a nervous new guard. Researchers are divided over what really happened. Was Richard III a villain, as later poets claimed, or a convenient scapegoat for a mystery nobody wanted solved? Did rivals engineer the boy's disappearance to seal their own power? Some suggest that they were spirited away and lived nameless but safe far from the ambitions that doomed their bloodline. No consensus has ever settled the question, only the sense that power's shadow in the tower is as long as the Thames itself. As you slip away from the looming walls, the city's bustle closes around you. But the mystery of the missing princes lingers in your thoughts, a soft echo that persists whenever old stones sharp ambition and the hopes of children share the same roof. Dawn slices through the fog, and with it comes the hard, biting wind of Towton, a battlefield notorious for its merciless cold and even colder betrayals. Here on Palm Sunday, 1461, England's fate turns beneath a low pewter sky. You find yourself among the masses, sons and fathers, shivering in patched cloaks, clutching splintered spears, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness and dread. Every step is uncertain, boots sinking into icy mud, your breath sharp in your throat. This is not a place for heroes, just survivors, hoping their side will be the one left standing by sundown. The battle at Towton is a mainstream historical fact. For good reason, it was the bloodiest single day in English history. As many as 50,000 men lined up along the ridges, with arrows blackening the sky, and the ground quickly turning from frost to a sodden red quagmire. The clash is relentless, no honor here, only chaos. Some men swap allegiance mid-fight, tying on new colors as the momentum shifts. In the midst of it all, a snowstorm swirls, blinding archers and masking desperate retreats. The scale of carnage is so immense that local villagers would later claim the fields remained barren for a generation, refusing to grow anything but weeds and wild poppies. But in the midst of this horror, quirky truths emerge. Legends claim one soldier survived the day only because he pretended to be dead, lying face down in freezing water, while the battle raged on above him. Others whispered of men who scribbled their names on scraps of linen and stuffed them in their boots, just in case someone cared to know who fell where. The bravest act wasn't swinging a sword, but managing to slip away unnoticed, clutching a friend's glove as a silent promise to carry word home. Surviving records remain at odds. Some claim Edward IV's victory was a stroke of tactical genius, while others credit pure luck and the freak snowstorm that blinded the Lancastrian lines at a crucial moment. Some historians believe the numbers are exaggerated, while others insist the full toll can never be known. There's no agreement except that the trauma would echo through villages and families for generations. As you stand ankle-deep in Towton's haunted mud, the lesson is as clear as the chill in your bones. Loyalty is as fleeting as the sun on this bitter morning, and survival depends on reading the wind, the faces around you, and the movement of banners on the far hill. When the carnage finally fades and the battlefield empties, the living stagger away in silence, grateful for warmth, for a familiar voice, for the luck that let them see another dawn. And as you turn from Towton's field, your boots heavy, you carry with you the sobering knowledge that every badge, oath, and color is only as strong as the will to survive. The clash of swords is a distant memory now as you move into the quieter, more dangerous world of whispered promises and secret bargains. Not every battle is fought with steel. Some are decided by candlelight and hushed voices in smoky alcoves where trust is a luxury and every favor has its price. The politics of the Wars of the Roses are built on alliances, some bold, some barely more than a handshake in the dark. You find yourself slipping from corridor to corridor, shadow to shadow, catching fragments of plans stitched together over cups of wine or through a servant's knowing wink. At a crowded banquet, the smiles are wide and the words carefully chosen, but under the table knees, touch and notes are passed. Nobles swear oaths to one lord by day and ride out to meet his enemy at night. There is a mainstream fact at the heart of it. All the war's outcome turned as much on these covert dealings as on open combat. Many a noble survived by playing both sides, making promises they never intended to keep. What's wonderfully quirky is how creative some of these secret alliances became. One legend tells of a merchant who, too anxious to be caught with treasonous letters, baked his messages inside crusty loaves of bread, passing secrets disguised as lunch. Another story, half joke and half warning, recounts how an ambitious squire tried to hide his allegiance by dressing his dog in a rival's colors and sending the animal to a neighboring camp with a cryptic ribbon tied to its tail. Even children got in on the game trading tokens or invented ciphers as part of their own miniature shadow wars. Researchers continue to debate just how widespread these double crosses truly were. Did everyone have a price? Was there ever such a thing as an unbreakable oath? Some believe that behind every alliance there were layers upon layers of deception, and that even the chroniclers who wrote it all down could not untangle the webs they tried to map. Others insist that family honor, however battered, still mattered more than mere survival, and that a few diehards clung to their chosen side even when ruin was certain. But for you wandering through this chessboard of half-truths and half-promises, the lesson is clear. The real currency of the Wars of the Roses was trust, and it was always in short supply. Each deal made in a whisper could turn deadly if overheard by the wrong ear. Each smile could mask a knife, and every new ally was just a potential future enemy waiting for their chance to switch banners and rewrite history in their favor. So you keep moving, careful and watchful, knowing that the most dangerous place of all is not on the battlefield, but in the drawing rooms, kitchens, and market stalls, where alliances are bought, sold, and sometimes quietly poisoned. The clangor of armies and the mutter of conspirators fade as you approach the battered gates of a castle under siege. Here life contracts to the thickness of stone walls and the hope that they'll hold another week. The wind howls through arrow slits carrying the tang of wood smoke, damp straw, and the sour reek of too many people packed together for too long. Inside, you find a world defined by patience and improvisation, where every day is a test of endurance. The mainstream historical fact during the Wars of the Roses castles, from Harlech in the wild Welsh hills to grim Warwick in the heart of England, endured sieges that lasted not just weeks, but sometimes months. Outnumbered defenders relied on hidden stores of grain and the fickleness of weather. For those trapped inside, time crawled. The only certainty was hunger. The garrison might start with roasted lamb and soft cheese, but soon the meals turned to stale bread, thin broth, and if the siege dragged on, things best left unnamed. There's no shortage of quirky detail. One infamous lord, desperate to keep spirits up, organized siege games, archery contests using rotten apples as targets, races across the frozen ramparts, and even a best moldy cheese competition judged by the oldest servant in the kitchens. Rats became both enemy and protein source, and the castle cat's status soared to minor nobility. Meanwhile, rumors of a secret tunnel, always just discovered, never actually used, circulated endlessly, giving hope to children and headaches to guards. Historians continue to debate just how bad things got behind those walls. Some argue that stories of starvation and frostbite are exaggerated, spun by chroniclers keen to dramatize the sufferings of noble families. Others point to scattered records of deaths, from exposure, desperate sorties, to steel supplies and accounts of miraculous bread appearing after prayer. No consensus, only a murky blend of fact and legend, as thick as the stew simmering over the smoky fire. You drift from the drafty hall to the upper chambers, where nobles play endless games of chess, gamble away silver buttons, and stare out over the besieging army's campfires. Children sleep in piles for warmth. Guards take shifts counting arrows and praying the next dawn brings relief instead of an assault. A siege is as much about waiting as about war patience phrase, and tempers can ignite faster than kindling in the hearth. The cold creeps into your bones as you descend into the cellars where supplies dwindle and rumors grow. Still, the resilience of the besieged is remarkable. A lady offers you a cup of wine, thin but warm, and a half-joking warning to beware the siege fever that seems to infect anyone too hopeful. You accept both, knowing that survival is as much about courage as it is about luck, and sometimes simply the ability to make bad wine taste good. As the nights lengthen and the torches gutter low, the castle stands scarred, hungry but unbroken. Life behind besieged walls is never comfortable, but it is unforgettable. And in the small victories, fresh bread, a warm fire, a joke shared in the dark, there lies the stubborn heart of survival. Outside the castle walls, where stories and swords meet, another battle is fought not with arrows or daggers, but with word symbols and the subtle art of shaping what people believe. This is the age of propaganda, when the crowned storytellers work as fiercely as any knight. The war for hearts and minds weaves through banners unfurled in crowded squares, sermons whispered from pulpits, and the secret messages hidden in songs carried down muddy lanes. You wander through a bustling market, the air bright with chatter and suspicion. A minstrel strums a tune about the noble deeds of York or Lancaster, depending on who paid him last. Town criers read proclamations, each one carefully polished to make their patron look like the true and rightful savior of England. Even coins in your pocket might carry a new king's face, an official reminder, pressed in silver, of where loyalty ought to lie. It is no accident the authorities know that whoever owns the story often owns the future, a mainstream fact to keep you awake. Both sides of the Wars of the Roses mastered the use of propaganda, crafting a flood of leaflets, emblems, and songs. Heralds distributed poems full of veiled threats and flowery promises. Clerics denounced the usurpers from their pulpits, while skilled artists painted murals of triumph or villainy, each one blurring the line between truth and fiction. The power of rumor became a weapon sharper than any sword. Quirky details sprout up in unexpected places. In one town, a baker with a knack for decoration shaped loaves into red or white roses, selling whichever design matched the latest victor. Children drew their own banners in chalk on alley walls, and some mothers stitched secret symbols into their sleeves to signal allegiance to passing soldiers. Merchants would swap shop signs overnight, painting over the names of traders with remarkable speed and little explanation. Today's villain often became tomorrow's hero, and vice versa. Historians remain divided over the real impact of propaganda on the war's outcome. Some argue that it swayed the masses, keeping unrest in check or fueling sudden uprisings. Others think the folk of England saw through most of it, going about their business, while letting the powerful play their games with stories and sigils. The surviving records are full of contradictions, proclamations that no one obeyed, rumors that sparked riots, and legends that grew larger each time they were retold. You, drifting through the market, sense how easily truth bends in the hands of those who hold the loudest bell or the biggest purse. With every new edict, a child's rhyme changes. With every new king, an old story is quietly erased. The war is fought in words as much as in wounds. And for those clever enough to read between the lines, survival depends not just on loyalty, but on knowing when to listen and when to forget. Past the market's swirl of slogans and the castle's stubborn resistance, You catch the echo of boots on cobblestones, a hurried rhythm marking the final stand of those who bet on the wrong side. The air is thick with anticipation and resignation. Banners sag from second-story windows, their colors faded and battered. You step into a world where yesterday's lords become today's rebels, holding on to lost causes with grim pride and a pinch of hope even as the odds tip sharply away. Here, at the ragged edge of power, noblemen and their followers plan last desperate gambles. The hall is tense with the smell of sweat and smoke as loyal retainers gather for a last speech, a last toast, a last defiant oath. A mainstream fact to anchor this scene: after each shift in the tides, the vanquished found themselves hunted, their estates seized, their titles erased with a single pen stroke. Some vanished into the forests or fled abroad. Others dug in for one more fight, hoping to turn history their way, with courage, cunning, or simply a refusal to surrender. In the chaos, you discover a quirky tradition. Rebels sometimes wore mismatched armor, pieced together from looted or discarded gear. One tale tells of a Lancastrian knight donning a helmet painted with a white rose, hoping to confuse his pursuers for just long enough to slip away. In a nearby village, local women supposedly helped fugitives by baking bread with hidden symbols, a notch or a twist in the crust, to signal which barns were safe for hiding. Songs were sung in coded verse, and even children played at smuggling messages, tucking scraps of parchment into hollow reeds or inside toy horses. Researchers debate the fates of these last holdouts. Did they inspire loyalty with their stubbornness, or did they doom entire communities to reprisal? Some chronicles paint them as tragic heroes, others as reckless gamblers who dragged their friends and families down with them. There's no single answer, just a patchwork of ballads, rumors, and half-buried bones beneath the orchard trees. You slip out with the rebels passing from firelight into the chill of the open fields. Some will find mercy, a few will fade into legend, and many will vanish, leaving only a whispered name and a memory that stubbornness sometimes counts for more than victory. The roses wilt, but resistance for a time still blooms in hidden corners. Twilight settles as you follow the winding road to the very edge of an era where one man's ambition will tip the balance and bring the long, bloody feud to its final reckoning. This is the moment of Richard III's fatal ride, a king determined to hold his crown against a rising tide of enemies and fate itself. The distant drumbeat of hooves thrums in your ears, each beat echoing the urgency of a leader who knows the world is closing in around him. You slip into the saddle beside Richard, feeling the chill that bites through his polished armor, the weight of a golden circlet pressing down with every mile. The fields at Bosworth are littered with omens, a crow perched on a broken standard, a forgotten glove lying in the dew. The anxious shifting of knights unsure which way the wind truly blows. Richard's gaze is hard, his words few, and yet you sense the desperation beneath his careful composure. He is a king, both made and unmade by the game of roses, a ruler shaped by the chaos he once used to climb so high. One mainstream fact gives the moment its gravity. The Battle of Bosworth Field, fought in August 1485, ended not only Richard's reign, but the entire Plantagenet dynasty. Outnumbered and betrayed, Richard plunged headlong into the heart of the fray, crying out for his horse, an echo that would haunt every retelling. In a final futile charge, he fought hand to hand, vanishing beneath a crush of blades and banners. His defeat paved the way for Henry Tudor's rise, the end of the wars, and the dawn of a new royal house. But the quirky human side of the legend clings to the details. It's said that Richard's standard-bearer clung to the royal flag even as he was cut down, and that a farmer later claimed to find Richard's lost crown in a hedgerow bent and muddy. Centuries later, when Richard's bones were uncovered beneath a modern car park, it was a reminder that even kings can vanish into the earth as easily as any commoner. Historians are forever divided over Richard's character. Was he the villain, immortalized by Shakespeare, a scheming, cold-hearted usurper? Or was he a misunderstood reformer, painted black by his enemies? The evidence, like the fog on Bosworth's field, never quite settles. Each retelling sharpens or softens the king's shadow, but the final charge remains desperate, dazzling, and doomed. You watch as the last Plantagenet slips beneath the tide of history, and the fields grow silent, but for the caw of crows, and the distant sound of someone, perhaps the next king, gathering up the scattered pieces of a broken crown. The morning after, Bosworth feels oddly hushed, a world made new, yet heavy, with the echoes of what came before. You walk through trampled grass and banners, past the last fading campfires, and into the first careful steps of a new dynasty. The war that divided families and scattered fortunes is over, but the wounds linger in the corners of every eye. Here, you witness the first acts of Tudor dawn, a tentative stitching together of a realm in tatters. Henry Tudor, cautious and pale from years in exile, is proclaimed king. You see him surrounded not by jubilant crowds, but by survivors, nobles who change badges as quickly as cloaks, and servants who keep their heads bowed, wary of betting on the wrong master twice. Henry's marriage to Elizabeth of York, a daughter of his defeated rivals, is a symbol designed to heal old divisions. In the flickering candlelight of Westminster, their wedding is less a celebration and more a careful treaty, each whispered vow, another knot binding red and white together. One mainstream historical fact: Henry VII's rule marks the official end of the Wars of the Roses, inaugurating the Tudor dynasty. By uniting the houses of York and Lancaster, he transforms civil war into the promise of peace. Coins are struck with the new Tudor rose, red and white petals entwined, a heraldic flourish to erase old grudges and assure the wary that a fresh era has truly begun. But the quirky details remind you how tentative this peace remains. It's said Henry had his bed searched each night for hidden assassins, and that Elizabeth stitched hidden charms into the seams of her son's baby clothes. Londoners, ever practical, kept both red and white sashes handy, just in case the political weather turned cold again. Village storytellers invented tales of secret heirs and hidden roses, proof that beneath the surface, old loyalties die hard. Scholars debate how lasting Henry's peace truly was. Was England truly healed, or did wounds simply scar over waiting for another season of unrest? The evidence is ambiguous. Prosperity returned, but so did suspicion. The crown sat heavy on every Tudor head. Yet for now, you feel the sense of a long-held breath released England, if not whole, at least quiet for the first time in a lifetime. You step away from the coronation's glow into the streets of a kingdom holding its breath, hoping that at last the roses will stop blooming for war. You find yourself wandering the lengthening shadows of a land at peace, at least on the surface. The last echoes of battle have faded, and England's people try to patch their lives together, sweeping out the ashes and planting fields once churned by war. It is a time of nervous hope, the sort that comes only after too much loss. In kitchen gardens and city lanes, people speak quietly, listening for rumors that finally bring news of trade, good harvests, or safe roads rather than shifting banners. Children grow up hearing stories of the great battles and vanished princes. But now, their games are less about choosing sides and more about pretending to be kings or queens of their own small fiefdoms. The merchants in London grow bolder, shipping English wool and tin to ports across the sea, while the guilds and craftsmen return to their trades, mending and building, with a sense of purpose they almost forgot. Even the noble houses, wary and watchful, start to look for ways to prosper in this new era, marrying sons and daughters, to cement alliances in ways that promise stability, if not affection. A mainstream fact to settle your mind: the Tudor dynasty, begun by Henry VII, would endure for over a century, guiding England into a new age of exploration, artistic flowering, and eventually empire. The rose, once a symbol of bitter division, is transformed into the Tudor rose, a carefully designed emblem that quietly erases the old rivalry in favor of unity, at least for those willing to forget. The quirky details linger as always. Some villages continue to host mock wars of the roses, not with swords, but with flower petals and painted shields, reenacting history in a gentle parody that lets old grudges fade. In churchyards, red and white roses sometimes bloom side by side, a gardener's nod to the past and a subtle warning not to take peace for granted. Ballads once sung in secret are now played at weddings, lyrics softened and rewritten so even rival cousins can join the chorus. Historians argue over the extent of this peace. Was it genuine, or merely a pause before the next storm? Did England truly heal, or did the scars run deeper than anyone dared admit? The answer is lost in the noise of daily life, in the laughter of children, and the creak of wagon wheels turning on roads that finally lead somewhere other than the front lines. You exhale into the new silence, knowing that history never truly ends. It only changes its tune. And somewhere, just out of sight, roses bloom quietly, a reminder that peace is always a work in progress. Now, at the edge of this long, winding journey, you pause and take stock. Could you, if dropped in the heart of England's most ruthless civil war, have survived with your head and your fortune intact? The game of the roses wasn't just for kings and queens, but for everyone caught between a changing world and the stubborn weight of old loyalties. Every dawn meant a fresh gamble, whose side to choose, what story to believe, whether to hide fight or simply fade into the background. Imagine waking to the chill of a drafty cottage, listening for hoofbeats on the road. Would you hang a red or white cloth above your door, or keep both within arm's reach, ready to swap them at a moment's notice? Survival demanded quick thinking and a flexible sense of allegiance. You might be a clever merchant plying both armies with bread, or a wise woman with secret herbs and stories for every color of rose. You might lie low, tending fields and pretending not to notice passing banners, or take a risk and send your strongest child to join the fight, hoping to pick the winning side. A mainstream fact: most people in this era survived not through bravery, but through adaptability and a keen sense of self-preservation. Historians agree that the average Englishman or woman became an expert at reading faces, changing allegiances, and turning every encounter into a chance for safety. Yet some things, family faith, the hope for a better year, remained constant, anchoring them in a world where everything else could change overnight. The quirky details say much about what survival meant. It might mean sharing coded gossip over the well painting a door with fresh lye to wash away the wrong color, or baking an extra loaf in case soldiers came calling. Some families hid precious keepsakes in wells, or beneath floorboards, while others pretended ignorance so convincingly that both sides left them alone. The debate lingers. Would you have had the nerve to bluff your way through a midnight search, or the wisdom to vanish before danger found you? And as scholars debate whether survival was about luck, wit, or sheer stubbornness, you realize the answer is probably all three. In the end, the Wars of the Roses didn't just test who deserved the crown. It tested who could weather the storm and still find a reason to smile at sunrise. But survival wasn't just forged in fields and cottages, it thrived, where ale-flowed secrets slipped loose and trust was cheaper than a warm pint. The tavern is never quiet, even when it should be. You duck beneath the low beams, shoes squelching in the muddy rushes that are meant to soak up the mess, but mostly just rearrange it. The tables are uneven, and the chairs, if they have backs at all, creak beneath the shifting weight of tired men, sharp-eyed women and boys who stare too hard at the coin in your palm. Behind the bar, the keeper's wife glares like she could spot a spy before the man himself even realizes what he's about to do. And perhaps she could. In these rooms, the rules are written in glances, not words. Who sits closest to the fire? Who pays for their own drink? And who waits for someone else to drop a copper in their bowl? Some come in for warmth, others for the stew, but a surprising number just want to listen. A merchant well-dressed, but trying not to be leans too far forward, his sleeve dipping into the beer. He doesn't notice. He's not here for comfort. He's here for a name or a password, or perhaps the hint of a plan whispered in the accent of the wrong county. Every patron is a potential threat or a resource. No one really knows. That's the beauty of the tavern. The truth is always one pint away from a lie. There are real dangers here, of course. A passing joke about a white rose can mean you're loyal to York, or just that you want your tablecloth clean for once this year. Historians still argue whether most of these spy rumors were exaggerated after the fact built up by nervous nobles and storytellers. But something about the way people huddle in corners, voices dropping whenever new boots enter, makes you wonder. After all, if there wasn't something to hide, why is the door always barred from the inside? On the windowsill, a stray cat curls up, pretending not to listen as the men debate the cost of sheep or the likelihood that Lord Warwick has really changed sides again. Outside, someone calls for more firewood. Inside, a stable boy sweeps the floor and accidentally lingers too long near a whispered conversation. Some scholars remain puzzled by just how many of England's most notorious turncoats were at first just faces in a crowd, a name on no one's list, until suddenly everyone wanted to buy them a drink. You lean closer, the smell of roasted onions and wet wool thick in your nostrils, and realize you're not alone. Every table has its watcher, every drinker a shadow. Somewhere, a laugh erupts a little too loud. Was that just a joke or a signal? The line between gossip and treason is as thin as the tavern soup and twice as hard to swallow. Someone slips you a folded scrap of parchment, the wax still warm from a rushed seal. You pretend not to notice because noticing is dangerous. Later, you'll wonder if it was the start of something huge or just another decoy, one more false rumor released into the alehouse fog. There is no scholarly consensus on which of these whispers truly shaped the course of the Wars of the Roses. But even the most skeptical chronicler admits that night after night the fate of England was bartered in low voices behind chipped mugs. So you sit, you listen, and as the door creaks open to admit a stranger in a travel-stained cloak, you can't help but wonder whose side they're really on. or whether you've just witnessed the first move in a game that will topple a king. It's odd how a web can be invisible until the light hits it just right, and then you realize you're caught inside it. That's how the spy networks of the Wars of the Roses felt unseen, but everywhere a tangle stretching from London's roaring markets all the way to the rain-soaked ports of Calais. Picture yourself at a crossroad, muddy, wind-battered, and feeling watched. England isn't a single kingdom, not really. It's a patchwork of barons and lords, each with their own territory, their own worries, and most importantly, their own hungry need for information. You can almost sense it. Every inn, every market stall, every country lane is part of a living network, buzzing with tiny messages shuttling up and down the social food chain. The nobles aren't subtle about their need for news. Margaret of Anjou wants to know who might betray her in the next council meeting. The Earl of Warwick wants a head start on the next shifting alliance. How do they get their answers? By spinning out lines of coin and favors, collecting secrets with the patience of a spider fattening up for winter. You wander into the city boots, echoing off narrow stones, and pass a baker's boy who nods twice, once for no news, twice for urgent. Is he working for York? Or is it Lancaster this week? In this city, loyalty is flexible, and a message delivered at dawn might become a death sentence by dusk. There's a scholarly debate about how much these networks truly controlled events versus simply reporting on them, but the evidence of tangled lines is everywhere. Some networks are simple, just a trusted steward in a noble's household and a fast horse for the relay. Others are so convoluted they'd make a monk dizzy. A butcher's wife passes a phrase to a merchant, who repeats it to a stable hand, who delivers it by accident if anyone asks to a scribe at the docks. This is how secrets traveled through ordinary people with extraordinary memories and a healthy respect for plausible deniability. Occasionally, these networks spark laughter, like the time a rumor intended for the Earl of March made it only as far as a flock of geese who became notorious for honking every time a suspicious stranger neared the riverside. No one is certain if the geese ever gave anyone away, but there are recorded complaints about their untimely noise from at least 3 different lords. That's how history sometimes preserves its weirdest moments, not in the grand chronicles, but in the margins next to the lists of debts and deliveries. Back in the shadowed corridors of power lords plot their next moves by the light of this web. They know the value of a good informer, a glance, a nod, a single wrong word. Trust is in short supply, and every man at court suspects he's being watched, even when he's alone. Some historians suggest that this culture of mutual suspicion was as effective as any army, for it forced nobles to weigh every friendship, every alliance, as if their lives depended on it. Sometimes the web phrase, "A courier is caught," or "a message is garbled." The wrong person overhears the right conversation. Yet for every failed delivery, a dozen succeed. It's a system built on small risks, small rewards, and the constant prickling awareness that at any moment you could become someone else's piece on the chessboard. You leave the city behind for the ports of Calais, where the spy networks take on a saltier flavor. Here sailors carry rumors between ships, dockside brothels, and smoky taverns with the salty tang of the channel never far away. These outposts are essential England's gateway to the continent, a place where information is as valuable as wool or wine. Some scholars remain puzzled by how swiftly news could travel from a bar in Calais to a council chamber in London, but the records show it happened again and again with remarkable efficiency. In the end, you realize To survive the Wars of the Roses, you didn't need to wield a sword. You just needed to know which web you were caught in and how gently to pull on its threads. You slip into the role of a servant, barely noticed, half invisible, yet in some ways more powerful than the armored knights snoring upstairs. Eavesdropping is an art, and you perfect it not by choice, but by necessity. In the Wars of the Roses, servants, the maids, the kitchen boys, the stable lads became the kingdom's most unexpected spies. The morning starts with the clatter of pots and the hiss of water over the fire. No one expects much from you. You're the ghost in the corridor, the hand that clears away empty goblets, the child crouched in the hayloft above a whispered counsel. And it's in these quiet corners, between the snores and the snooping, that history sometimes slips its mask and lets you see the real game at play. The nobles are careless, lulled by routine and hierarchy. You dust the tapestries and overhear a lord muttering about supply wagons headed for the north, meant for Yorkist troops. A chambermaid is told to be sure the red rose brooch is ready for tonight, and her eyebrows twitch just slightly. Maybe she understands, or maybe it's just another odd, noble request. Servants notice. They have to. Their lives depend on it, even if the lords above them forget they exist. Historians still argue whether these eavesdropping servants were the backbone of real espionage, or just unwitting witnesses whose tales grew taller each time they were told. The written records are patchy, full of contradictions. Some chronicles paint the servants as cunning and loyal to a fault, while others claim they were easily swayed by coin fear or the promise of a better place in a rival's household. But there's no debate about the danger. If caught a servant, suspected of spying, faced grim punishments, at best dismissal, and a one-way journey to a distant village. At worst, a midnight visit from men who preferred not to give their names. Still, the risk was sometimes worth it. A single word heard at the right moment could buy protection for your family, or just enough gold to bribe the steward and keep your little brother out of the press gangs. Every so often, a rumor surfaces that a lowly stable boy, who knew exactly which horse belonged to which, lord played both sides, delivering messages to York one week to Lancaster the next. These are the stories that never make it into the official rolls, yet they linger sticky as spilled cider in the memories of those who watched power shift with the sweep of a broom. It's not all dark and dire, though. Servants, after all, have their own sly humor. There's the famous case of a kitchen girl who, so the story goes, salted the lord's soup just a bit too much after overhearing him plot against her cousin. Some versions claim this harmless revenge led to days of grumbling and a suspiciously sudden outbreak of stomach complaints among the council. Scholars continue to debate whether this tale is mere kitchen gossip or a true act of culinary sabotage, but it's the kind of detail that makes you smile in the candlelight. As you shuffle through the long, shadowed halls, you realize the quietest people in the manor know the most. Every whispered insult, every sleep-mumbled plan, every sigh of regret they drift down, caught in the net of servants who for a few coins or a word to the wise can turn the tide of a war. There is no scholarly consensus on just how many of England's grandest betrayals were made possible by a mop, a meal, or a message delivered with downcast eyes. But when you think about it, you start to wonder, who's really in control? The lords who make the plans, or the invisible hands who hear them first? There's a peculiar magic in the way a secret travels, especially when it's wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax. You find yourself in a narrow chamber, candlelight flickering the cold stone walls pressing in. Here words are weapons, and every letter is a risk. The hidden letters and secret codes of the Wars of the Roses are nothing if not a testament to human ingenuity and the absolute lack of trust in polite conversation. You watch as a young scribe, hunched over his work, scratches out phrases in a cramped, hurried hand. He stops, considers, then writes a simple word that to an outsider means nothing. To those in the know, it could mean life or death, a shipment arriving early, a trader's name, or the time and place for a midnight meeting under the elm trees. Each message is disguised sometimes in the form of a shopping list or an innocent prayer. It's the sort of double meaning that would leave a bishop blushing. Historians still argue how much of this coded correspondence ever reached its intended audience. Some letters were intercepted, others lost to rain rats or a servant's suspicious glare. Sometimes the only thing left was a wax seal pressed into the dirt near a barn where the messenger was never seen again. Surviving documents suggest that the use of cryptic language grew more elaborate as the wars dragged on. Some codes were simple, like switching vowels or hiding names in acrostics. Others were so complex that modern scholars debate whether anyone could have possibly deciphered them in time. Researchers continue to debate the effectiveness of these medieval ciphers. One historian writes, "With what you imagine is a weary sigh." There's a kind of dark humor in imagining a desperate lord puzzling over a letter that seems to talk about bread eggs and candle wicks, never realizing it's really a battle plan. It's not all war and treason. Sometimes it's just a lover's note masked as a shopping list or a warning to stay away from the west gate after dusk. Occasionally, a scribe will add a flourish, a tiny doodle of a bird or a flower, as if to wink at anyone clever enough to notice. One overlooked detail is the sheer volume of letters that must have changed hands. The roads between castles and camps were clogged with messengers, their pouches filled with folded secrets. Some rode official routes, flashing badges and coats of arms. Others slunk along the hedgerows, trusting to mud and luck. There's even a chronicled complaint about the cost of sealing wax skyrocketing, so many clandestine notes needing so many seals. In the rare moments when a letter reaches its destination, you picture the recipient, noble merchant or mercenary, breaking the seal with trembling hands, reading by the guttering light of a single candle. Does their heart leap at good news, or freeze at the sight of a name written where none should be? The uncertainty is its own kind of suspense, stretching from sender to receiver and out into the night. Of course, there's no scholarly consensus on the ratio of honest messengers to double agents, or how often a letter's contents were changed in transit. The only thing certain is that if you wanted a plan to stay secret in these years, you needed more than a fast horse and a steady hand. You needed a mind for puzzles and a willingness to trust absolutely no one. Some nights, as you watch the candle burn low, you wonder how many battles turned on a sentence hidden in plain sight. How many lovers were saved? How many friends betrayed all because someone knew just where to tuck the truth between the lines? You don't know who to trust. Not really. And maybe that's why, in these dim, candlelit corridors and echoing stone halls, double agents thrive. They are the shadows, men and women, who move between worlds, smiling at both sides, always ready to betray or be betrayed. It's said the Wars of the Roses made more fortune hunters than knights, and nowhere is that clearer than in the winding tale of double agents and the betrayals that stitched England's fate. You hear stories always told in whispers about the ones who played both sides. There's the infamous tale of a messenger who rode for York with news of an impending siege, then turned around just miles from the city to sell that same news to a Lancastrian captain for twice the fee. Did he do it for money, for survival, or just because he liked the danger? Historians still argue, and likely always will. Some scholars remain puzzled by the sheer nerve of these agents. One dryly notes in a letter nobody was supposed to see. The rewards were tempting. A well-timed betrayal could earn you a title, a manor, or simply the right to keep your head attached to your neck. But the risks? Terrifying. There are rumors, half true perhaps, of informants thrown into the castle moat or sent away to monasteries where their only friend was the cold stone floor. In this climate, the act of switching allegiances became as routine as switching cloaks. If the wind blew for Lancaster, the Yorkist spy might wake up with a new accent and a red rose in his lapel. One overlooked detail: the role of women in these tangled plots. While noble ladies are often celebrated for their marriages and feuds, less is said of those who carried messages, changed disguises, and traded secrets for jewels or safe passage. There's a record, a brief nervous scrawl of a laundress who, for a small bag of silver, passed along enough information to ruin 3 men and save her own family from the plague. She vanishes from history after that. Was it gratitude, or did someone want her story ended before she could sell another secret? Some double agents were driven by ideology, at least that's what the poems claim. But the daily reality was far more practical. When the land is divided, so are loyalties. Your cousin might fight for York, your brother for Lancaster. And you just want to survive, maybe even get rich while you're at it. Every great betrayal leaves a ripple, a rumor that circles the fire long after the deed is done. A knight returns from a failed skirmish with a new scar and a reputation for having friends on both sides. The local innkeeper seems always to have enough coin, despite the war's toll. What does he know, and who pays him to know it? There is no scholarly consensus on the real motivations of these double agents, only the endless guessing that comes after. Perhaps the strangest part is how common these stories became. By the war's end, nobody could be sure of anyone. The lines were blurred, and the definition of traitor shifted like the tide. Sometimes the only real difference between a loyalist and a double agent was who lived to tell their side of the story. You sit back, feeling the weight of so many shifting allegiances. How many lives were ruined? How many fortunes made, all by those willing to risk everything except perhaps their own anonymity? The candle gutters, and in the darkness, you wonder if you were there. Would you play both sides too? The castle corridors echo with more than footsteps tonight. They're alive, with the hush of secrets passed from ear to ear, the swish of skirts, and the heavy weight of intent. You follow the shadowy trail of Margaret of Anjou's informants, the Queen's chosen few, who walked the delicate line between loyalty and self-preservation. These are not the famous names in the chronicles, but the ones whispered behind fans at feasts or recognized only by the nervous glances of the guards at the gate. Margaret's world is woven of rumors. To survive as a queen in a kingdom perpetually at war, she needed more than royal blood and a sharp tongue. She needed eyes and ears in every hall, informants who could slip through the cracks, listen when no one thought them worthy of attention, and whisper poison into the right noble's ear at exactly the right moment. You drift through the great hall past flickering torches and long tables crowded with wary lords. The Queen's informants move quietly, often disguised as mere handmaidens, visiting musicians or priests offering confession. One overlooked detail: many of Margaret's most trusted messengers were not noble at all, but daughters of merchants or distant cousins of minor gentry, their positions at court bought with favors, not blood. Their low rank allowed them to be invisible, an advantage few queens ever possessed. Historians continue to debate how much power these women wielded. Some accounts suggest Margaret orchestrated entire councils with a nudge here, a whispered threat there. Others claim her shadow council was a hodgepodge of self-serving busybodies, their information unreliable at best. What is certain, her spies were everywhere, and their loyalty was rarely to each other. In the high-stakes world of medieval court, alliances could be broken over a spilled goblet of wine or a careless joke. It wasn't all grand schemes and dark corridors. Sometimes the queen's informants worked in broad daylight. A favorite attendant might pass a folded note while plaiting Margaret's hair. A page boy would deliver a cryptic riddle with the queen's afternoon honeycakes. There's a story, half believed, that one of Margaret's maids used her skill at embroidery to stitch coded warnings into the hem of the queen's gowns. The hem, ironically, was later burned after a kitchen fire, its secrets lost to ash and legend. There's no scholarly consensus on the ultimate effectiveness of Margaret's network. Did she truly hold sway over the tides of war? Or did her informants simply keep her one step ahead of embarrassment? What is agreed upon, her enemies feared her knowledge as much as her armies, and the rumors she spread often traveled faster than any knight's horse. You pause picturing the queen at her writing desk, candles flickering as she listens to her latest report. How many of England's disasters and victories were seeded by a whisper that began here in these silent, vigilant halls? A new hush settles as you slip into the domain of disguises and false names, a world where identity is nothing but a shifting mask. Here you notice that even the most familiar faces sometimes flicker, cloaked in borrowed robes, their voices softened by accents practiced in dark corners. Spies in the Wars of the Roses were masters of vanishing acts, sliding through monasteries, blending with pilgrims, or donning the rags of wandering friars. It's a land where nobody is quite who they seem, and that uncertainty is the perfect shield. You find yourself walking alongside a friar with dirt under his fingernails and Latin prayers on his lips, his pack too heavy for a man with only the Lord for company. But is he truly on a pilgrimage, or simply passing through as an agent of some distant lord? The cleverest spies found refuge in the very places that promise peace abbeys, shrines, or even bustling markets disguised as ordinary travelers. Historians remain divided on whether the church was complicit or simply blind to these deceptions, but it's clear that the cloak of piety often made the best camouflage. There's humor in the situation too. One popular tale tells of a would-be spy who dressed as a wandering friar, forgot the words to the midday prayer, and nearly gave himself away when he blessed the bread with a fisherman's knot instead of the sign of the cross. Even in grave times, mistakes could be as deadly as daggers or as harmless as laughter echoing down a cloistered hallway. The chroniclers might debate whether these stories are exaggerations, but they're proof that fear and farce were often fellow travelers. The lengths to which these agents went are astonishing. Some nobles kept whole wardrobes of disguises ready in their manor houses, peasant tunics, woolen caps, false mustaches stitched from horsehair. There are records, genuine or invented, of spies vanishing for months, reappearing as abbey gardeners, or even as mute pilgrims incapable of betraying secrets by word, but not by written note. Some of these disguises worked so well that even when caught, the true identity of the spy remained a mystery. Women, too, found clever ways to vanish and reappear. A merchant's daughter might enter court as a seamstress, only to disappear days later, replaced by a new servant girl who bore an uncanny resemblance. The chroniclers rarely name these women, but they left behind small traces: a missing ribbon, an odd accent, or a letter signed by a name that never existed before or after. There is no scholarly consensus on how often disguises succeeded or how many failed quietly and fatally. But what endures is the sense of unease, a kingdom where any traveler could be an enemy, any confessor a traitor. In such an uncertain world, truth is as slippery as eel in a monk's kitchen. As the candles burn low, you wonder if trust is built on faces and names, what happens to a realm where neither can be trusted. The only certainty is that behind every mask, there's another story waiting to be uncovered. There's a sudden chill as the topic shifts to intercepted missives, the lifeblood of medieval espionage, and the stuff of nightmares for every would-be plotter. You find yourself holding a fragile parchment, the wax seal, broken ink smudged by nervous hands. A message meant for a duke, a warning for a queen, or an order to ambush all now lying exposed vulnerable in the wrong person's grasp. It's here in these intercepted letters that entire campaigns rose or fell sometimes with nothing more than a clumsy courier and a watchful eye. Imagine the anxiety, a trusted messenger racing through the forest heart, pounding as hooves thunder behind him. Somewhere hidden among the trees or crouched by a lonely milestone waits a rival agent ready to pounce. Historians still argue whether the interception of these messages was mostly luck skill or brute force. Some say skilled spies tracked messengers for days, watching for routines. Others claim that a loose tongue at a roadside inn or a dropped envelope outside the city walls was the undoing of countless plans. One overlooked detail is the unofficial network of letter hunters, men, women, even children, who knew the value of a wax seal with the right crest. For some, intercepting a message was a living. They'd present the stolen letter to the nearest noble and hope for a small fortune in reward or a place at a better table. There are tales, half true, half boast, of a street urchin in Calais who discovered a bundle of letters sewn into the lining of a traveling priest's cloak. Some scholars remain puzzled by the frequency with which crucial messages were supposedly lost to such coincidences, suggesting that at least some were staged. The contents switched long before the letter was ever delivered. The consequences could be spectacular. A campaign's secrecy could unravel in an instant. One famous example tells of a letter meant to coordinate a dawn attack on a key fortress that was intercepted on a foggy night and promptly delivered to the enemy. The defenders prepared a surprise welcome, and the would-be attackers arrived to find themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Chronicles from both sides mention the embarrassment and the string of hasty denials that followed, but only one side got to rewrite the story as a triumphant trap. Sometimes, interception meant more than simply stealing information. Forgeries and clever rewrites were part of the game. A letter could be altered with a few well-placed words, leading a noble to suspect his closest allies or walk right into a trap. There is no scholarly consensus on how many original letters were actually clever forgeries, but the fact that many have conflicting accounts in the archives is enough to fuel suspicion to this day. It's easy to imagine the feeling breaking a seal, reading words not meant for your eyes, and realizing the danger you're now in. For the unlucky discovery meant swift punishment or an opportunity to turn the tables, betraying both sender and recipient for the right price. As you set the parchment aside, you're left with the uneasy sense that in a world of spies and shifting alliances, even words on a page were never entirely trustworthy. Sometimes, the fate of kingdoms was decided not by what was said, but by who got to read it first. Step quietly through the torchlit halls, and you'll find the scent of foreign perfumes hints of saffron rosewater, and the faintest trace of Burgundy wine. This is where the spies of France and Burgundy blend into England's feuding courts. Their accents softened by years of practice, their eyes always calculating. The Wars of the Roses might look at first glance like an English family quarrel, but the shadows are crowded with outsiders carrying hidden agendas and foreign coin. You watch as a slender figure in a velvet cap exchanges pleasantries with a Yorkist noble, the conversation sprinkled with just enough compliments to draw out a secret or two. The French and Burgundian embassies, ostensibly dignified outposts, buzz with the low-level hum of gathered intelligence. Their servants chat in corners, the ambassadors' clerks slip folded notes to merchants, and more than one translator is really a paid observer, ears wide open for anything that can be used in the war of whispers. Some scholars remain puzzled by the ease with which foreign agents were able to insert themselves into English circles. Was it the allure of continental fashion? The bribes pressed quietly into the hands of a desperate squire? Or perhaps just the willingness to share a good bottle of imported wine and a scandalous joke? There's no scholarly consensus, only the growing realization that England was never as insular as it pretended to be. Foreign interference wasn't always as sinister as it sounds. Sometimes it was almost comic. A Burgundian spy, posing as a fencing instructor, gained access to the household of a prominent noble only to be unmasked when he challenged a famous English knight to a duel and promptly lost spectacularly. The story survives in 3 different chronicles, each claiming a different winner and a different insult shouted across the courtyard. The truth, like the best intelligence, is likely somewhere in the middle, for the truly ambitious England's civil strife offered opportunity. French and Burgundian spies played both sides, feeding information or misinformation to whichever camp offered the best reward. Occasionally, they would even betray each other, switching allegiances with the flick of a signet ring. One overlooked detail is how these foreigners managed to smuggle coded messages across the channel inside hollowed-out loaves of bread, sewn into seams of woolen cloaks, or hidden in the false bottom of a traveling chest. The lords of England, of course, suspected foreign meddling at every turn. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they accused. The innocent paranoia was as much a currency as gold or rumor. Researchers continue to debate the real impact of these continental spies. Was it decisive, or just another layer of confusion in a war already muddied by suspicion? What remains certain is this: behind every English rose, white or red, there was often a French lily or Burgundian boar lurking in the hedgerow. In a world of endless rivalry, even your enemies might have enemies of their own. A certain chill creeps up the spine when you realize what happened to those caught playing both sides. The punishments for espionage during the Wars of the Roses were both severe and at times strangely inventive. You slip through the door of a dank, low-ceilinged chamber, torchlight, flickering chains clinking faintly, and witness the fate awaiting those who failed at the game of secrets. Not all punishments ended in darkness. Yes, traitors could lose their heads, but the medieval imagination was boundless. There are records, half-whispered, half-gleeful, of spies forced to wear iron masks shaped like donkey faces paraded through crowded markets as a warning to others. Some were sent to the wildest borders of Wales or Ireland, a fate some considered worse than death, where their only company would be sheepstorms and stories that grew more outlandish with each retelling. One quirky detail: certain towns had special gossip stones, lumpy rocks set in the center of the village green. Those convicted of spreading false news or leaking secrets might be chained to these stones for a day, forced to listen as every passerby hurled insults, or more often left behind baskets of rotten turnips. The stones became infamous not for cruelty, but for the folk songs and ribald jokes made at the spy's expense. Historians still argue whether these punishments were mostly meant to humiliate or genuinely to deter would-be informants. There is no scholarly consensus on whether these public rituals did more to foster community laughter or deepen the paranoia that haunted every market square. Sometimes the punishments carried a pinch of irony. A would-be codebreaker was sentenced to copy out the Psalms by hand day after day until he found the error of his ways. Another agent caught forging a noble's seal was banished not to a dungeon, but to a monastery famous for its silence, forbidden from speaking another word for a year. Some suggest that a few of these silent exiles later became sought-after confessors, after all, who could better keep a secret than someone trained never to speak. What unites these tales, both grim and absurd, is the thread of uncertainty. Were these punishments really carried out or exaggerated in the retelling? Did humiliation truly cure a penchant for gossip, or just teach better caution? Some researchers believe the most creative penalties were invented by chroniclers desperate to entertain as well as warn. Yet one thing is clear. The risks were high, and everyone, noble servants, and even children, knew that a misplaced word could have consequences beyond the imagination. The laughter in the square might linger for a day, but the memory of the iron mask or the silent year would last far longer. As you leave the cold chamber, you realize in the end it was not just swords or scrolls that maintained the fragile peace, but a shared understanding that in a land of secrets, everyone was always listening and always wondering if they'd be next. You slip deeper into the undercurrents of power, where the spy masters of the realm move quietly behind the scenes. These aren't the kings on their thrones, or the knights in shining armor, but the lords and ladies whose skill lay in orchestrating shadows, not swinging swords. If history is a stage, then these cunning nobles are the stage managers, pulling ropes, setting scenes, and making sure the right players speak at just the right moment. In smoky chambers, a spy master listens more than he talks. You find yourself at the edge of a flickering fire, noting the glint of signet rings and the soft exchange of coded phrases. One overlooked detail: these secretive masterminds were often lesser-known figures passed over in the chronicles, but crucial in the chronicles of rumor and whisper. They were expert in the art of plausible deniability, always 2 steps away from the scene of the crime, ready to claim ignorance if their plans went awry. Some spy masters preferred elaborate schemes. There's the story of a baron who devised a network using traveling musicians as message carriers, trusting that a wandering lute player would attract less suspicion than a cloaked rider. Others took the opposite approach, employing only the most trusted relatives, keeping their network small, tight, and bound by family loyalty. Historians continue to debate which method was more effective. Some argue for the efficiency of blood ties, others for the unpredictability of outsiders with nothing to lose. Sometimes, the very existence of a spy master was itself a secret. A well-placed rumor, a forged letter, or a chance encounter at a feast could spark suspicion that a rival lord was orchestrating a grand conspiracy, sometimes true, often wildly exaggerated. The mere suggestion that someone was the brains behind the throne could topple reputations or build them in the space of a single moonlit night. What united these behind-the-scenes players was their uncanny ability to turn the smallest scrap of gossip into leverage. A misplaced glove, a lover's quarrel, even a servant's nervous glance could become the spark for a new plot. There is no scholarly consensus on how many of the war's turning points can be traced directly to these hidden hands, but every chronicler agrees where there is power, there is always someone plotting in the shadows. Every so often, a spy master's luck ran out a letter intercepted, a trusted agent turned a scheme unraveling in public. Yet for every exposed puppet master, a dozen others slipped away, their names fading into rumor, their influence lingering on. You sit by the dying embers realizing that the greatest danger in these wars might never have been found on the battlefield, but in the smoky silence where plans were born. As you journey beyond the candlelit chambers and into the open air, you meet a very different kind of spy, the knight in gleaming armor, whose helmet visor hides not just his face, but sometimes his true loyalties. In the Wars of the Roses, even warriors sworn to the sword could serve two masters riding boldly through enemy lines but secretly passing word to those who paid or persuaded them best. There's a paradox here. The armored knight romanticized in song and legend wielded not just a blade, but the oldest weapon of all information. You might picture a heavily armed figure sitting atop a restless horse banners snapping in the wind. But there's also a sealed letter tucked beneath the breastplate, or a coded phrase scrawled inside a gauntlet. Some knights switched sides more often than they switched lances, while others simply reported on troop movements, food shortages, or the mood of their own camp. Historians continue to debate the scale of this militant espionage. Some argue that the number of knights serving as informants was greatly exaggerated by chroniclers eager for dramatic tales. Others believe that these spies in armor were crucial in a world where battles could hinge on the smallest scrap of news. There are conflicting accounts. One chronicler describes a knight who, during a parley under a white flag, dropped a glove as a signal that the enemy's wine was poisoned. Another tells of an armored champion who delayed an attack stalling with tales of noble lineage until a hidden messenger escaped out the back gate. The risk was immense. If a knight was suspected of spying, the penalty could be as simple as banishment or as final as a blade slipped between the plates of his armor while he slept. Yet some did it for ideals, believing that sharing information might save lives or tip the scales of justice. Others did it for coin, for revenge, or simply for the thrill of walking the razor's edge. One overlooked detail: knights often relied on their squires and grooms to pass information. These young men, skilled at blending in with the camp's background noise, became essential conduits for coded messages and hushed warnings. There's even a record of a squire who swapped out a heraldic crest in the dead of night, sowing confusion among the ranks and sending rival scouts in the wrong direction. Of course, there is no scholarly consensus on just how much this nightly espionage changed the outcome of battles. The chronicles are muddy, and motives are always suspect. But it's clear that the line between hero and traitor could be drawn and erased with nothing more than a wink and a whisper in the tent at midnight. As dawn breaks, you watch the camp come to life: armor, clanking pennants, rising men laughing too loudly to cover their nerves. You wonder how many stories never made it into the ballads, and how many secrets rode into battle, hidden in plain sight. Daylight brings the bustle of city streets, where gossip is as common as bread, and the merchants behind their crowded stalls play a quieter but no less crucial role in the game of intrigue. You wander through a tangle of narrow lanes, every corner bursting with rumor, every stall holder an accidental or intentional source of information. In the Wars of the Roses, urban gossips could shape the tide of politics as much as any armored knight or noble's spy. It's an overlooked truth city. Folk with their constant coming and going saw more and heard more than they often let on. A fishmonger's apprentice might overhear a seditious plan while haggling with a noble's cook. The local tanner's wife, with her keen eyes and a knack for small talk, could gather whispers about troop movements or secret deals while selling leather to soldiers. Historians continue to debate whether these paid informers acted out of patriotism, greed, or simple curiosity. Some suggest the merchants used rumor as currency trading news for favors, cheaper rents, or special licenses. There's an almost comic edge to the urban grapevine. A shoemaker's apprentice starts a rumor about a noble's illegitimate son, and within days the tale has grown so wild that it involves pirates, a stolen cow, and an underground tunnel to Calais. Some chroniclers recorded entire subplots of the war that may have begun as nothing more than a tavern joke spun up over too many cups of ale, and then passed along by street hawkers eager for entertainment. One overlooked detail is the use of secret tokens. A merchant might hand over a coin with a nicked edge, or a folded scrap of linen marked in blue dye, a signal that a piece of information had passed safely from one hand to another. There's no scholarly consensus on how organized these systems were, but the evidence suggests at least some degree of coordination, especially in the larger cities, where danger and opportunity were never far away. Sometimes these unofficial rumor mongers got more than they bargained for. There's a story part, cautionary tale, part dark comedy of a cheese seller in York who accidentally stumbled upon a plot against a local lord, and who thereafter received daily gifts of bread and ale from anonymous sources. She was never sure whether it was gratitude or a bribe to keep her silent. The story ends, as so many do, with her moving to a different city, her secrets and her cheeses equally in demand. No matter their motives, the city merchants and gossip mongers became an unofficial intelligence network, blurring the lines between fact and fiction, safety and peril. Researchers remain divided on whether this network did more to help or hinder the warring factions. But one thing is certain: in the market's clamor, every word was a weapon, and sometimes the smallest whisper could topple the tallest tower. Sometimes all the secrets and schemes in the world simply fall apart, leaving behind nothing but bewildered faces and half-baked stories. The history of the Wars of the Roses is full of failed plots and foiled schemes where careful plans unraveled in the most unexpected and occasionally hilarious ways. Picture a shadowy alley just after midnight. A man convinced he's carrying a vital message to a traitor loses his nerve and drops the note straight into a puddle where it's fished out by a passing pig. In another tale, a would-be assassin hides in a wine cellar for 2 days, only to be discovered when his snoring gives him away to the cook. Historians continue to debate how many of these bungled plots actually happen versus how many were invented by later chroniclers hungry for a good story. There's no scholarly consensus, just a tangle of rumors and winks in the margins of ancient ledgers. One overlooked detail: some of the biggest failures were caused not by heroism or loyalty, but by simple bad luck. There's a record of a coded message meant to signal a rebellion, which ended up in the hands of the wrong messenger, who couldn't read and used the note to wrap a herring. Another legend tells of a plot foiled because a conspirator's elaborate disguise included shoes 2 sizes too small, leading him to hobble through town and attract far more attention than any spy should. For the warring factions, every failed scheme was a reminder that information is only as powerful as the people and circumstances that carry it. Sometimes the wrong word in the right ear brought a plan tumbling down. Other times, a simple misstep turned an agent into the laughingstock of the entire town. Even the most elaborate plans could be undone by the weather, a clever dog, or just a bad bowl of stew at the wrong moment. These mishaps have their own legacy. Chroniclers often treated them with gentle mockery, spinning tales of hapless plotters who might have changed the fate of England had they only stayed awake or worn quieter shoes. Some researchers suspect that nobles themselves encouraged the spread of these stories, hoping to reassure their followers that fate, not just cunning or loyalty, would see them through. As you reflect on the many failed plots that littered this era, you realize it's not always the grand schemes or the famous victories that shape history, but the small, absurd, utterly human missteps along the way. In a land ruled by secrets, sometimes the best defense was a well-timed mistake. There is a softness now, the night deepening around you, and it's time to listen to the last echoes, the lasting imprint of espionage long after swords have been sheathed and kings have slept. As you drift through these final moments, you sense that the spycraft of the Wars of the Roses did more than decide battles. It quietly set the tone for all who came after, foreshadowing the rise of modern intelligence and secret service. You find yourself walking a deserted lane, the village dark, except for a single lamp flickering in a window. There is no more shouting in the marketplace, no hurried hoofbeats of a desperate courier, just the gentle hush that settles after centuries of conflict. And yet, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the residue of secrets, the murmur of a code in the back room of an alehouse, the careful cough of a servant at the wrong moment, the weight of a letter in a trembling hand. Historians continue to debate the true legacy of these medieval spies. Some see them as little more than amateur meddlers stumbling through a world of luck and improvisation. Others argue that these networks laid the groundwork for future generations of professional intelligence, England's later spy masters, cryptographers, and code breakers. There is no scholarly consensus, of course, but one overlooked detail. The names of many of these shadowy agents have simply vanished, their deeds credited to the great lords they once served or buried in the margins of musty court records. It's strange to realize that in their time, most spies were forgotten by design. Disguises became habits. Code words turned into legends. A few survived the wars, quietly prospering under the rule of whichever king emerged last, while others faded into obscurity, their secrets never told. The whispers linger, those stories retold in family kitchens and city taverns, in the sly wink of a merchant, or the knowing nod of a courtier who has seen too much. Perhaps the real lesson is this: in every age, from medieval castles to modern boardrooms, it is the unseen that shapes the world as much as the seen. The clever question asked in the right place, the letter that never arrives, the rumor that becomes history with the turning of a page. And as the night draws to a close, you are left to wonder not just who survived because of these hidden players, but who even now is listening, passing secrets, and quietly tilting the world in ways most will never see.